400 years, that is the number, 400 years without a voice, without a prophet, without a dream, without a burning bush, without an angel, without a single word from heaven. The Bible ends the Old Testament with Malachi, and the next time God opens his mouth is when an angel appears to an elderly priest named Zechariah to announce the birth of John the Baptist. Between those two moments, 400 years of a silence so deep that the rabbis called it the time when heaven closed. And most pastors teach you that was a punishment, that God got angry with Israel and stopped speaking, that it was a parenthesis, a pause, a void, period. Next topic. Let's move on to Matthew. But there is something that almost nobody has taught you, something that when you discover it, it permanently changes the way you read your Bible. And it is this: that was not the first time God went silent for 400 years. He had done it before. And the pattern that emerges when you place the two periods side by side is so precise, so symmetrical, so impossible to be coincidence, that the only thing left for you to do is sit down and reconsider everything you thought you knew about the silence of God. Today, we are going to open both windows at the same time. The two silences, the two 400-year periods, and what you are going to discover is not that God went quiet, it is that the silence was the plan. But before we get there, I need to take you to the first silence, the one nobody talks about, the one hidden between two books of your Bible that you already know, but have never connected in this way. Open your Bible to Genesis chapter 15. Abraham has a problem. God has promised him descendants as numerous as the stars, but Abraham does not have a single child. He is 75 years old. His wife Sarah is barren. And God, instead of giving him an immediate solution, does something that at first glance seems cruel. He shows him the future, a future Abraham did not want to see. Genesis 15 verse 13. God says to Abraham word for word, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. 400 years, not 40, not 100, 400. God is telling Abraham that before fulfilling the promise, his descendants are going to spend 4 centuries in a land that is not theirs, serving people who hate them, weeping under a son they did not choose. And Abraham cannot do anything to change that number. Notice something. God did not say perhaps, or he did not say if they misbehave. He said no for certain. This is going to happen. It is a decree. And that decree includes a silence, because from the moment Jacob's family goes down to Egypt to the moment Moses encounters the burning bush, the Bible does not record a single direct communication from God to his people. Not one. Think about that for a second. Joseph dies in Genesis 50. Moses appears in Exodus 2. Between those 2 points, there is a narrative gap that the Bible crosses in barely 5 verses. 5 verses to cover 400 years of human history. And in those 5 verses, Exodus chapter 1, verses 6 through 8, all we are told is that Joseph died, that the Israelites multiplied, and that a new Pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph. That is all. 400 years summarized in 3 facts. No prophets, no angels, no dreams, nothing. And now I want you to put yourself in the shoes of an Israelite of the 3rd generation in Egypt. Your grandfather still remembered someone who had known Joseph, but you do not. For you, Joseph is a legend, a story your father told you at night while the 2 of you were kneading clay for the Pharaoh's bricks. You know there is a promise. You know that God said something to a man named Abraham, but that promise has 400 years of dust on it. And every morning when you wake up and they put a whip to your back, the promise feels farther away, more unreal, more like a fairy tale. The Egyptian sun crushes you from 6 in the morning. Your hands are cracked from mixing straw with mud. Your back has scars you no longer feel. And as you drag another brick toward the Pharaoh's storage pyramid, you look up at the sky and ask the God of your ancestors, "Are you still there? Do you still remember us? Or was it all a lie?" No answer. There is never an answer. You have spent your whole life without an answer. And the worst part is not the silence. The worst part is that you begin to suspect the promise was never real, that your father told you a story so you would have the strength to get up each morning, that Abraham never spoke with anyone, that the stars are just stars, that they mean nothing. Exodus chapter 6 verse 9 captures that despair with a sentence that breaks my heart every time I read it. Moses spoke thus to the people of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses because of their broken spirit and harsh slavery. When Moses finally arrived with the message of liberation, Israel could not receive it. 400 years of silence had broken something inside them. Their spirit was so crushed that they could not even hear good news. Slavery had not only chained their bodies, it had chained their hope. Exodus 2 verses 23 through 25 captures that moment with an honesty that stings. During those many days the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Did you hear that? And God remembered. As if he had been silent so long that the text needed to clarify that God had not forgotten. 400 years of groaning, and suddenly 4 verbs in succession: heard, remembered, saw, knew. 4 verbs that broke 4 centuries of silence. And what came afterward was the greatest intervention of God in all of the Old Testament. The 10 plagues, the sea split in 2, manna from heaven, the law at Sinai, the pillar of fire. All of that was the answer to the silence, and it was so explosive, so monumental, so impossible to ignore, that 3,500 years later we are still telling the story. But there is something more in this first silence that you need to see before we move to the second. Something hidden in a phrase we read a moment ago that you probably passed over. God told Abraham that his descendants would be slaves for 400 years, but he also told him something else. Genesis 15, verse 16. And they shall come back here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. That sentence is devastating when you understand it. God was not only silent with respect to Israel, he was silent with respect to the Amorites as well. While Israel suffered in Egypt, the Amorites were filling up the cup of their wickedness in the Promised Land. And God was allowing both processes to mature at the same time. The suffering of Israel and the wickedness of the Amorites had to reach their exact point for the intervention to be complete. If God had acted 200 years earlier, Israel would not have been ready. If he had acted 200 years later, the Amorites would already have destroyed everything. The silence had a clock, and the clock was perfect. Hold on to this, because it is exactly what you are going to see in the second silence. Exactly. And when you see it, the hair on your arms is going to stand on end. Now let's jump 3,000 years forward. We are in Jerusalem. It is approximately 430 BC, and there is a man speaking. His name is Malachi. He is the last prophet of the Old Testament. And what he's about to say are the last words that God is going to speak through a prophet for the next 400 years. The last ones. Malachi does not know he is the last. No prophet knows when heaven is going to close. But there is something fascinating about the context of Malachi that you need to understand. Israel has just returned from exile in Babylon. They have rebuilt the temple, although it is an inferior version to Solomon's, so inferior that the elders who remembered the first temple wept when they saw the second, according to Ezra 3:12. And instead of living in gratitude for their return, The people have fallen into a deep spiritual apathy. The priests offer sick and defective animals on the altar, Malachi 1:8. The people do not pay their tithes, Malachi 3:8. There are divorces of convenience, Malachi 2:16. The phrase that best describes the spiritual state of Israel at that moment is the one God himself speaks in Malachi 1:10. Oh, that there were one among you who would shut the doors, that you might not kindle fire on my altar in vain. God is asking someone to shut the doors of the temple. He would rather have a closed temple than a temple with empty worship. And it is in that atmosphere that Malachi speaks the last prophetic words of the Old Testament. And the irony of those words is chilling when you read them knowing what comes next. Malachi chapter 4, verses 5 and 6, the last lines of the Old Testament. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes, and he will turn the hearts of fathers to their children, and the hearts of children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the land with a decree of utter destruction. The last words of the Old Testament are a promise and a warning. God is going to send someone, but not now, before the great day. And that before turned out to be 400 years of silence, 400 years between the promise and its fulfillment. Jesus himself confirmed that this prophecy was fulfilled in John the Baptist in Matthew the 11:14. And if you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come. And after Malachi, nothing, silence. The prophet goes quiet, heaven closes, and for 400 years, Israel does not hear a single word from God. 400 years. The same number, exactly the same number that God announced to Abraham in Genesis 15. And that is not a coincidence. It cannot be a coincidence. Because the prophet Amos, who wrote before Malachi, had already warned that this would happen. Amos chapter 8, verses 11 and 12. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord God, when I will send a famine on the land, not a famine of bread, nor a thirst for water, but of hearing the words of the Lord. They shall wander from sea to sea and from north to east. They shall run to and fro to seek the word of the Lord, but they shall not find it. A famine of hearing the word. That is exactly what happened. And now, I want you to understand what it felt like to live in that famine. Imagine you are a devout Jew in Jerusalem, the year 300 BC. You have grown up hearing the scrolls of the prophets. You know that God spoke to Isaiah, to Jeremiah, to Ezekiel, to Daniel. You know there was a time when heaven was open and the voice of God was heard through men who walked among the people. But you have never experienced that. Neither has your father, nor your grandfather, nor your grandfather's grandfather. You have 130 years of accumulated silence behind you. And every generation that passes without a prophetic voice makes the faith a little more fragile, a little more theoretical, a little more, they say God spoke instead of God speaks. If this is making you think of something in your own life, hold on to it, because we are going to come back to that at the end. And what I'm going to say then is going to connect in a way you don't expect. Now, here is where the story becomes extraordinary. Because during those 400 years between Malachi and John the Baptist, the world did not stop. On the contrary, the world changed faster and more radically than in any other period of ancient history. And each one of those changes, when you look at them with open eyes, turns out to be a piece of a puzzle that only makes sense when you see the complete picture. Let's start at the beginning. When Malachi speaks his final words around 430 BC, Israel is under the rule of the Persian Empire. The Persians had conquered Babylon in 539 BC, and King Cyrus had issued a decree allowing the Jews to return to their land. You can find that in Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. Cyrus, a pagan king, fulfilling without knowing it a prophecy that Isaiah had written 150 years earlier in Isaiah 44, verse 28, where God calls Cyrus by name, and says he will rebuild Jerusalem. But what almost nobody notices is this. The Persians did not only allow Israel to return, they gave them something far more important. They gave them religious autonomy. Under Persian rule, Jews could worship freely, maintain their traditions, read their scriptures, practice their faith. And that created something that had not existed before the exile, the synagogue. Before Babylon, Jews worshipped in the temple in Jerusalem, only there. But during the exile, having no temple, they began to gather in homes and halls to read the Torah together. Those gatherings became synagogues, and when they returned to the land, the synagogues did not disappear. They multiplied. By the time of Jesus, there were synagogues in every city of the known world. And when Paul went out to preach the gospel, where did he go first? To the local synagogue, Acts 17, verse 2. And Paul went in, as was his custom, and on 3 Sabbath days he reasoned with them from the scriptures. The synagogue, which was born during the crisis of the exile, became the perfect infrastructure for the expansion of the gospel. And nobody designed it for that. Nobody sat down and said, let's create a system of local gatherings that 500 years from now will serve to spread the news about a carpenter from Nazareth. It simply happened, or rather, it was moved. And that is only the first piece. The second piece has a proper name, Alexander the Great. In 334 BC, a 20-year-old Macedonian crossed the Hellespont with an army of 40,000 men, and in barely 11 years conquered the largest empire the world had ever seen. From Greece to Egypt, from Syria to India, everything. And Alexander died before turning 33 in Babylon, most likely from typhoid fever, leaving no clear heir. And here is a detail that escapes most people. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, in his Antiquities of the Jews, Book 11, Chapter 8, recounts that when Alexander was marching toward Jerusalem intending to destroy it, the high priest Jaddus went out to meet him dressed in his priestly robes. And Alexander, upon seeing him, prostrated himself before him. His generals asked why he was bowing before a Jewish priest, and Alexander replied that he had seen that same figure in a dream before invading Asia, promising him victory. Now, many modern historians debate whether this account is historical or legendary. What is verifiable is that Alexander treated the Jews with unusual respect and allowed them to maintain their laws and traditions. Jerusalem was not destroyed. The temple was not touched. In the midst of the most sweeping conquest the ancient world had ever seen, the city of the God of Israel was protected. But what Alexander left was something more powerful than any army. He left a language, Koine Greek. Wherever Alexander conquered, he imposed Greek culture, gymnasiums, theaters, libraries, and above all, the language. Before Alexander, the world was a Tower of Babel of local languages. After Alexander, there was a lingua franca that every educated person spoke, from Alexandria to Antioch, from Rome to Jerusalem. When Alexander died in 323 BC, his empire was divided among his 4 generals. Daniel had prophesied this as well. Daniel chapter 8, verses 8 and 22. The great horn of the male goat was broken, and in its place 4 notable horns came up toward the 4 winds of heaven. 4 generals, 4 kingdoms. Ptolemy took Egypt, Seleucus took Syria and Mesopotamia, Cassander took Macedonia, Lysimachus took Thrace and Asia Minor, and Judea was trapped in the middle, first under the Ptolemies and then under the Seleucids, like a grain of wheat between 2 millstones. And why does that matter? Because the New Testament was written in Koine Greek, not in Hebrew, not in Aramaic, in Greek, the language that Alexander had sown across the entire conquered world. Paul could write a letter to the Romans in Greek and be understood. Luke could write his gospel in Greek, and any educated person in the empire could read it. The gospel did not need translators to reach the known world. The language was already in place, like a linguistic highway, waiting for the message that was going to travel along it. But there is something even more surprising that happened with that language, and it is the third piece of the puzzle. Around the year 280 BC, in the city of Alexandria, Egypt, King Ptolemy II Philadelphus did something that changed history forever. He summoned a group of 72 Jewish scholars and commissioned them to translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. The result was the Septuagint, the first complete translation of the Old Testament into another language. And that translation became the Bible of the ancient world. The rabbinic tradition, recorded in the letter of Aristeas, says that the 72 translators were placed in separate cells, and each one produced an identical translation. Whether or not that account is literal, what is historical is that the Septuagint was completed in Alexandria during the 3rd century BC, and that it became the most widely read version of the scriptures in the ancient world. So widely read that when the apostles quoted the Old Testament in the New Testament, most of the time they were quoting the Septuagint, not the original Hebrew text. Think about it. Before the Septuagint, the messianic prophecies were locked in a language that only Jews could read. Isaiah 53, the suffering servant. Micah 5:2, the Messiah born in Bethlehem. Daniel 9, the 70 weeks. All of that was in Hebrew. But after the Septuagint, any person who spoke Greek could read those prophecies. And when Jesus was born in Bethlehem, when he died on a cross, when he rose on the 3rd day, the prophecies that announced him were already circulating in the language of the entire world. The apostles did not have to convince anyone that those prophecies existed. People already knew them. The Septuagint had taken care of that 250 years earlier, and there is something more about the Septuagint that very few people know. It was thanks to this translation that a phenomenon arose known as God-fearers. Gentiles who did not fully convert to Judaism, but who worshipped the God of Israel, attended synagogues and knew the scriptures. Acts chapter 10 mentions Cornelius, a Roman centurion who was devout and feared God with all his household. Acts chapter 13 verse 26, Paul addresses in the synagogue of Antioch, "Those among you who fear God." These God-fearers, who existed because the Septuagint had opened the scriptures to them, became the first mass audience for the gospel outside of Judaism. They were people who already knew the God of Abraham, who had already read the messianic prophecies, and who, when they heard that the Messiah had come, were prepared to believe. The Septuagint did not only translate words, it created an audience. And here is where I need you to pay very close attention, because what comes next is perhaps the darkest piece of the entire puzzle, and at the same time, the most revealing. In 175 BC, a man named Antiochus IV ascended to the throne of the Seleucid Empire. He proclaimed himself Epiphanes, meaning God manifest. And he decided that the Jewish religion had to disappear. In 167 BC, Antiochus entered the temple in Jerusalem, erected an altar to Zeus over the altar of burnt offering, and sacrificed a pig in the Holy of Holies. He banned circumcision under penalty of death. He banned the reading of the Torah. He ordered all copies of the scriptures destroyed. Mothers who circumcised their sons were executed with the babies hung around their necks. Jews who refused to eat pork were tortured to death. Daniel had prophesied this centuries earlier. Daniel chapter 11 verses 31 and 32. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. That is exactly what Antiochus did, to the letter. But here is where the story took a turn nobody expected. An elderly priest named Mattathias from the town of Modane rose up. When a Seleucid official tried to force the people to offer pagan sacrifices, Mattathias killed the official and the Jew who was about to comply, and he fled to the mountains with his 5 sons. That was how the Maccabean revolt began, an impossible-to-win guerrilla war. A handful of farmers and priests against the most powerful professional army in the Middle East, and they won. In 164 BC, Judas Maccabeus, son of Mattathias, reconquered Jerusalem, purified the temple, and restored the altar. That victory is celebrated to this day. It is called Hanukkah, and Jesus himself recognized it. John chapter 10, verse 22. At that time, the feast of dedication took place at Jerusalem. It was winter. Jesus was in the temple during Hanukkah, walking through Solomon's colonnade, at a feast that did not exist in the Old Testament, at a feast that was born during the supposed silence of God. And that should make you stop for a moment, because if God were truly silent, if he had truly abandoned Israel, then how do you explain that a group of farmers defeated the most powerful empire of their time and restored the temple? How do you explain that the Jewish faith survived the most brutal attempt to exterminate it? The Maccabean revolt has no logical military explanation, and yet it happened during the silence, in the midst of the silence. If this is beginning to change the way you see things, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because what comes next is even stronger. After the Maccabees, Israel had approximately 80 years of independence under the Hasmonean dynasty. But that independence quickly became corrupted. The Hasmoneans were priests who proclaimed themselves kings, something that the law of Moses did not permit because the monarchy belonged to the tribe of Judah and the priesthood to the tribe of Levi. Mixing both roles was a direct violation of the order established by God. And that corruption produced the internal power struggles that eventually opened the door to the next piece of the puzzle. Rome. In 63 BC, the Roman general Pompey entered Jerusalem, taking advantage of a civil war between 2 Hasmonean brothers who were disputing the throne. Pompey took the city, entered the temple, even entered the Holy of Holies. And from that moment, Israel became a province of the Roman Empire. And here most preachers tell you that Rome was the final tragedy, the last nail in the coffin of Jewish hope. But when you look at what Rome actually brought to the world, the tragedy transforms into something completely different. Rome built a road system that connected the entire empire. More than 80,000 kilometers of paved roads running from Britain to Mesopotamia, from Spain to North Africa. And those roads, built to move legions, became the exact routes by which Paul, Peter, Barnabas, Silas, and dozens of anonymous missionaries carried the gospel to the known world. Every city Paul visited on his missionary journeys was connected by Roman roads. Every letter he wrote traveled through the Roman postal system. The logistics of the most powerful empire on earth became the logistics of Christian expansion. But Rome did not only build roads, it established the Pax Romana. From 27 BC, when Augustus became emperor, the Mediterranean world experienced an unprecedented period of peace. Not a perfect peace, but a stability sufficient for a person to travel from Jerusalem to Rome without encountering a war along the way. Before Rome, that was impossible. Every kingdom had its borders, its armies, its conflicts. But under the Pax Romana, the world became an open space, and the gospel needed exactly that, an open space to run. And there is one more piece of information about Rome that is almost never mentioned in this context. Rome had a legal system that protected certain recognized religions. Judaism was one of them. Jews had legal permission to practice their faith, gather in synagogues, and maintain their traditions anywhere in the empire. And when Christianity was born as a branch of Judaism, it initially enjoyed that same legal protection, Acts chapter 18 verses 14 and 15 shows this clearly. When the Jews of Corinth accused Paul before the proconsul Gallio, Gallio dismissed them, saying it was an internal religious matter and that Rome did not intervene in such things. That protection gave Christianity a crucial window of time to establish itself before the imperial persecutions began. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Synagogue, Greek language, Septuagint, Maccabean survival, Roman roads, Pax Romana, legal protection. Each piece placed in its position during the 400 years of supposed silence. Each piece put there by a different empire. Each empire believing it was fulfilling its own agenda, and each one, without knowing it, building the exact infrastructure that God needed for the most important moment in human history. But there is one more piece, and it is perhaps the most striking of all. During those 400 years, the messianic expectation reached levels it had never reached before. The prophecies of Daniel, especially Daniel chapter 9 verses 24 through 27, had established a timeline. The 70 weeks of Daniel were a countdown, and the rabbis knew it. Let me explain why this is so important. Daniel 9:25 says, "Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again." 70 prophetic weeks. In biblical prophecy, a week frequently represents 7 years, giving a total of 490 years. The rabbis of the intertestamental period made obsessive calculations about these figures. They knew the clock was running, they knew the deadline was approaching, and that created a spiritual tension that grew with every passing generation. The Essenes of Qumran, who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in 1947, were consumed with calculating the exact moment of the Messiah's arrival. These men had withdrawn to the desert near the Dead Sea, convinced that the corruption of the temple and the priesthood was a sign that the end was near. They were preparing for a cosmic war between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. Their manuscripts, perfectly preserved in clay jars for 2,000 years, reveal a community that read Daniel as if it were a newspaper from the future. The Pharisees, for their part, had emerged as a lay movement that opposed the Hellenization of the Jewish faith. Their name probably comes from the Hebrew perushim, meaning separated ones, separated from Greek influence, separated from cultural contamination. And although the New Testament frequently presents them as hypocrites, and Jesus certainly confronted their hypocrisy, it is important to understand that the Pharisees were born as a preservation movement. Without them, the Jewish faith would probably have been absorbed by Greek culture. Without them, there would have been no synagogues for Paul to preach in. Without them, the law of Moses would have disappeared under the pressure of Hellenization. The Sadducees controlled the temple and came from aristocratic priestly families. They did not believe in the resurrection of the dead, in angels or in spirits, according to Acts 23:8, and the Zealots were beginning to emerge as an armed movement that dreamed of driving out Rome by force. Notice what was happening. 4 different groups with 4 different visions of the future, all having arisen during the prophetic silence, all expecting something monumental to occur. First-century Jewish society before Christ was a spiritual pressure cooker, and all of that was the product of the 400 years of silence. Luke chapter 3 verse 15 captures that tension with a brilliant sentence, as the people were in expectation and all were questioning in their hearts concerning John, whether he might be the Christ. The people were in expectation. 400 years of silence had created a spiritual pressure so intense that when a man dressed in camel's hair appeared preaching in the desert, the first question was not, "Who is he?" but "Could he be the Messiah?" And now I need you to come back with me to the first silence, to Egypt, because the parallel is so precise it is uncanny. In Egypt, Israel suffered 400 years of slavery, and just before the liberation, Exodus chapter 1 verse 12 tells us that the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. The oppression did not destroy them, it multiplied them. When Moses arrived, Israel was not a small family. It was a nation of more than 600,000 men of military age, according to Exodus 12:37, which means probably more than 2 million people, counting women and children. 400 years of silence and suffering had turned a family of 70 people into an entire nation. And between Malachi and John the Baptist, 400 years of prophetic silence had created an expectation so intense, an infrastructure so perfect, a world so prepared, that when the Messiah finally came, the gospel spread throughout the known world in a single generation, just one. Paul, who began preaching around 47 AD, could write to the Colossians barely 15 years later, "The word of truth, the gospel which has come to you, as indeed in the whole world," Colossians 1:5-6. Both times the silence produced multiplication. Both times the waiting created the conditions for explosive expansion. Both times what looked like abandonment turned out to be preparation. And here is the turn that gives meaning to everything. Do you remember what we saw in Genesis 15:16? God told Abraham that Israel would be in Egypt 400 years, but that the reason was not only Israel's suffering, it was that the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. God was waiting for two processes to mature at the same time, the growth of Israel and the wickedness of the Amorites. When both reached their exact point, God acted. Now look at the second silence with the same eyes. During the 400 years between Malachi and John the Baptist, God was not only preparing the infrastructure for the gospel, He was waiting for the spiritual condition of the world to reach its exact point. Paul describes it in Romans chapter 1 verses 21-25. The world had reached the bottom of idolatry, of empty wisdom, of religion without content. The Greeks had philosophy but no hope. The Romans had power but no inner peace. The Jews had the law but were crushed under the burden of the human traditions the Pharisees had added. The entire world was hungry. And it was at exactly that point of maximum hunger that Galatians 4 verse 4 was fulfilled. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent forth His Son, born of woman, born under the law. The fullness of time, not before, not after, at the exact moment, when every piece of the puzzle was in its place. When the language was set, the roads were built, the scriptures were translated, the synagogues were scattered across the world, the expectation was at its peak, and the spiritual hunger was unbearable. At that exact moment, in an irrelevant little town called Bethlehem, a baby cried for the first time, and the silence broke. But notice how it broke, not with an army, not with an earthquake, not with fire from heaven. It broke with a cry, the cry of a newborn in a manger. Luke 2, verses 6 and 7. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling cloths, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. 400 years of cosmic silence ended by the cry of a baby in a stable. Empires razed and toppled, languages scattered across entire continents, armies marching, philosophers debating, translators working, Maccabees dying, roads being paved, and all of that converging on a manger in a village that did not even appear on the important maps of the time. Micah had prophesied it 700 years earlier. Micah 5, verse 2, "But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days. Too little to be among the clans of Judah, God chose the insignificant to break the longest silence in history, and that alone should already tell you something about how God works. And the way it broke is the most beautiful part of this entire story. Luke chapter 1. An elderly priest named Zechariah is in the temple. It is his turn to burn incense in the holy place. He has waited his entire life for this moment. The incense was burned twice a day in the temple, and there were so many priests that many of them only got to do it once in their entire lives. This was Zechariah's moment, his only chance to stand alone before God in the most sacred place accessible to a priest. The holy place was not a large hall. It was a room approximately 9 meters long by 9 meters wide, according to the measurements of Herod's temple. Stone walls covered in gold, the 7-branched lampstand on one side, the table of the bread of the presence on the other, and at the far end, the altar of incense right before the veil that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies, where no one entered except the high priest once a year. Zechariah is there, alone, with the incense smoking between his hands. Outside, the entire people is praying. Luke 1 verse 10. And the whole multitude of the people were praying outside at the hour of incense. And Zechariah carries a burden the crowd cannot see. He and his wife Elizabeth have no children. Luke says both of them were advanced in years. In Jewish culture, having no children was not only a personal sorrow, it was a social shame. It was interpreted as a sign that God had not blessed you. Zechariah has spent decades carrying that shame in silence. Personal silence and national silence, both at the same time. Zechariah represents all of Israel in that moment. A man who prays and receives no answer. A people who cry out and hear nothing. A priest in a temple that has gone 400 years without hearing a prophetic voice. And then Luke 1 verse 11. And there appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. 400 years of silence broken in a second in the temple before the altar, with an angel who says, "Your prayer has been heard. Your wife is going to have a son, and that son is going to prepare the way for the Messiah." Zechariah could not believe it. Luke 1 verse 18. How shall I know this? For I am an old man, and my wife is advanced in years. And the angel replied, I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God. Gabriel, the same angel who had spoken to Daniel 500 years earlier, Daniel 9 verse 21. The last angel who had brought a prophetic message before the silence was the first to bring a message after the silence. The same Gabriel, as if God wanted to say, I did not go anywhere. The messenger I sent to the last prophet before the silence is the same one I am sending now that the silence ends. The conversation was never interrupted. There was only a pause. And if that doesn't raise the hair on your arms, what follows will. Notice the final parallel. In the first silence in Egypt, God broke the silence with Moses, a man who stuttered. Exodus 4:10, a man who did not know how to speak. God broke 400 years of silence through someone who had no words. In the second silence, between Malachi and the New Testament, God broke the silence with Zechariah, a man whom the angel left mute. Luke 1 verse 20, and behold, you will be silent and unable to speak until the day that these things take place. God broke 400 years of silence through a man whose voice he took away. Both times, the instrument God chose to end the silence was someone who could not speak, as if God were making it absolutely clear that the power was not in the human voice, but in the divine word. Moses stuttered, but liberated a nation. Zechariah was mute, but his son John prepared the way for Christ. If you feel this is changing something inside you, if you feel you are seeing the Bible in a way you have never seen it before, like this video and subscribe. Because every week we explore the Bible at this depth. And what comes now is going to connect everything we have discovered with your personal life. Because the pattern does not end in the Bible. There is someone watching me right now who has been in their own personal silence for months, perhaps years. You have prayed and received no answer. You have cried out and heaven seems closed. You have done everything you know how to do and nothing changes. And at some point, perhaps in the last few weeks, perhaps today, a part of you has started to wonder whether God has forgotten you, whether your prayer got lost along the way, whether the promise you believed you had received was just your imagination. I know a woman who lost her husband 3 years ago. She went to church every Sunday, sat in the same pew as always, sang the same hymns, but inside she was screaming. She asked God every night, "Why did you take him? What did I do wrong? Are you still there?" And for 3 years, nothing. Silence. Until one day, without planning it, a neighbor knocked on her door to ask her to watch her child while she went to the hospital. That neighbor had no one else. And that woman, the widow who felt invisible, discovered that God had not left her alone to suffer. He had placed her exactly where she was so she could be the answer to someone else's prayer. 3 years of silence had not been abandonment. They had been positioning. I know a young man who left the church at 17. He told his father, "If God is real, why doesn't he answer me?" His father did not know what to say, and for 6 years that young man lived without praying, without reading the Bible, without setting foot in a church. 6 years of self-imposed silence, until one day, in a crisis I am not going to detail because it is not my story to tell, he found himself on his knees on the floor of his apartment, saying words he did not know he still remembered. Prayers his father had taught him as a child. And in that moment, he understood something he could not understand at 17. The silence had not erased what God had planted. It had only buried it. And what is buried was germinating. And I cannot tell you when your silence is going to end. I am not a prophet. I do not have that answer. But what I can tell you, based on everything we have just seen together, is what the silence of God does not mean. The silence of God does not mean absence. It does not mean forgetfulness. It does not mean punishment. It does not mean the promise was cancelled. Look at what Isaiah chapter 55, verses 8 and 9 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." When God was silent for 400 years in Egypt, he was multiplying Israel from 70 people to more than 2 million. When God was silent for 400 years between Malachi and John the Baptist, he was building a universal language, a network of roads, a translation of the scriptures, a legal infrastructure, and a spiritual expectation that would make it possible for the gospel to reach the entire world in one generation. Both times, the silence was not inactivity. It was the most intense activity. It was just happening in dimensions that Israel could not see. And here, I want to bring one more piece of information that connects everything in a way you did not expect. Acts chapter 7. Stephen is before the Sanhedrin. He is about to be stoned. And in his final speech before he dies, he does something extraordinary. He reviews all of Israel's history. And when he reaches the period in Egypt, he says in verse 6, "And God spoke to this effect, that his offspring would be sojourners in a land belonging to others, who would enslave them and afflict them 400 years." Stephen is citing Genesis 15:13. Stephen, the first Christian martyr, connects the 400 years of Egypt with the history he is living. And why does that matter? Because Stephen is speaking before the same religious leaders who have just rejected the Messiah, before the men who have just come out of 400 years of silence, who saw God break that silence with Jesus and who decided to crucify him. Stephen is telling them this has happened before. They rejected Moses the first time too. Acts 7 verse 35, this Moses, whom they rejected, saying, who made you a ruler and a judge? This man God sent as both ruler and redeemer. The pattern repeats once more. God sends the liberator after the silence, and the people reject him the first time. Moses was rejected and had to flee to Midian. Jesus was rejected and crucified. But in both cases, the rejection did not stop the plan. Moses came back and liberated Israel. Jesus rose and liberated humanity. And it is here that everything converges on a single point. Do you remember how this video began? I said that almost nobody teaches you that God had already done this before, that the 400-year pattern was not an isolated event, that when you place the two silences side by side, what emerges is not the image of an absent God, but the image of a God who has a method, a God who uses silence as a tool of preparation, a God who, when he is quiet, is not resting. He is working. And when he finally speaks, what he says changes history forever. In Egypt, after the silence, the Exodus, the greatest liberation of the Old Testament, between Malachi and John the Baptist, after the silence, Christ, the greatest liberation in all of history. And what nobody notices is that God himself left a hidden clue that connects the two silences in a way that still astonishes me. In Exodus 12, verses 40 and 41, it says, the time that the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. On that very day, not a similar day, the very same day, the rabbinic tradition recorded in the Talmud, Tractate Megillah 14a, teaches that just as God has exact times, divine liberations are not approximate, they are precise. And the period between Malachi and the birth of John the Baptist is approximately 430 years as well. Not 400, not 500, 430. The same number as Exodus 12:40. As if God had a cosmic clock where 430 years is exactly the time he needs to prepare a liberation that shakes the foundations of reality. Psalm 90, verse 4. For 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past. If for God 1,000 years are like a day, 430 years are like 10 hours. 10 hours of preparation for something eternal. It is not silence. It is concentration. It is the calm before the most beautiful storm in history. And I want to close with something I believe you are going to need. At the beginning of this video, I said that most pastors teach you that the 400 years of silence were a punishment or a parenthesis. And now, after everything we have seen together, I want to invite you to consider another possibility. What if God's silence in your life is not a punishment? What if it is not forgetfulness? What if it is not indifference? What if it is preparation? What if right now, while you hear nothing, God is moving empires? What if he is building roads you cannot yet see? What if he is placing pieces in their position that you did not even know you needed? What if your personal Galatians 4:4 has not yet come, but is on the way? Israel waited 400 years in Egypt and received the Exodus. Israel waited 400 years after Malachi and received Christ. Both times, the wait was worth it. Both times, what came after the silence was incomparably greater than anything they could have imagined during the silence. Genesis 15:13 was a promise that took 400 years to be fulfilled, but it was fulfilled. Galatians 4:4 was the fulfillment of centuries of silent preparation, but it was fulfilled. And if there is one thing these two silences teach us, it is that when God is quiet, it is not because he has nothing to say. It is because what he is preparing is too great to announce in advance. Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 3. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end, it will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come, it will not delay. If it seems slow, wait for it. That verse was written for people in the midst of silence, for people who pray and do not hear, for people who wait and do not see. Habakkuk did not say, if it comes. He said, it will surely come, without a doubt. Israel waited 400 years in Egypt. Without a doubt, the Exodus came. Israel waited 400 years after Malachi. Without a doubt, Christ came. And what looks like silence, what looks like abandonment, what looks like a prayer that got lost along the way may be exactly the opposite. It may be the pause before the symphony, the calm before the greatest intervention you have ever seen. What appears on your screen right now connects directly with what we have just discovered, and I believe that after watching this video, you are ready to see it. Click, because what comes next will challenge everything you thought you knew about how God works in what you cannot see.